Hi, this is Liqian Ren, Director of Modern Alpha Wisdom Tree ETFs. Welcome to China of Tomorrow podcast series, where we navigate China, India, Japan, and the broader emerging markets with members of Wisdom Tree and other industry leaders. Hi, today is March 3rd, 2025, so glad to be back. Today I'm going to quickly comment on three things. One is that in the next couple of days, or actually ongoing, China's National People's Congress, its annual meeting where Chinese government set the GDP growth target, which I think I'll go into detail in terms of how they set it, but I think upfront, most likely 5%, no surprise there. Second thing is, quickly comment on U.S. added another 10%. By the way, for people not tracking the tariff, U.S. added about 25% tariff on China several years ago, and then talked about adding 10% a couple months ago, and then this time it was another 10%. So just in last few years, the tariff on China is closer to 45%. For people who are doing business, actually you could definitely feel the pinch. And then the third thing is something interesting that not necessarily financial related, but it's really geopolitics. I know everybody is paying attention to President Trump, Zelensky, Ukraine, all the discussions at the White House. One interesting thing in the last night is that the U.S. Embassy, the WeChat account, which is, if you view it, it's almost like the subscription news media communication channel of the U.S. Embassy to China. It almost never allow comments. But last night, on an article about current events, it allowed comments. But the interesting comments is all the thousands of comments were pretty, I wouldn't say anti, but pretty negative on U.S. and negative on President Trump. This is interesting because this is U.S. politics spilling over into China, because the U.S. Embassy select those comments. So they are selecting overwhelmingly almost all negative comments on the current U.S. administration by the U.S. Embassy, which my understanding is under the State Department administration, right? So obviously we don't have internal view, but if you looking U.S. politics from outside, it must be some people who working for the government, but not as happy. So I think very interesting things going on, and then I think we will go into each one of in detail. First important thing is the National People's Congress. I think the National People's Congress, there's not much surprise there. Mostly how China set the target. First, you have the provincial level, stating what's their target for GDP is, what's their target for CPI is. The one thing to maybe look is, what kind of stimulus they're coming out. On that, actually, I'm slightly on the negative side. I don't think there will be much coming out. It will be mostly what's being announced. I don't see a significant add to what's being announced. Maybe the shift of the tone, but I think the shift of tone already is very clear that, the President Xi meeting so high profile of the private entrepreneurs. There, I also want people to realize that, yes, the shift is real. On the other hand, China does shift from one side to the other every couple of years. So I think we should know that we should not say that this is a permanent shift. It is a shift, a short to medium term, but it should not be interpreted as a permanent shift toward favoring private entrepreneurs. So on the National People's Congress, I really don't think there's much to look, unless sometimes some political events happens. If people remember a couple of years back, some internal politics spilling out into the public view. Even China, as controlled media environment as in China, unexpected things could arise. that's I would say that probably how best to summarize what happened on President Trump's meeting with the president of Ukraine. So I think again that on that I don't think there will be much surprise unless there was some internal politics spilling over. The second thing is about the tariffs. China, in terms of facing tariffs, this risk is now, I think people maybe overly a little bit too optimistic that the tariffs on China will be gradual and not necessarily go to 60%. But I think it's highly likely it will go even further because President Trump is very set on using tariff as a tool. Now, obviously, we heard some comments about Warren Buffett. His comments on tariff is not necessarily positive, but I think what we as analysts is that what's likely to happen, right? And I think the tariff will continue. But in terms of China, it's not doing much because in some way, again, U.S. have a lot of domestic internal politics. And U.S. right now in a bit of, I wouldn't say spat, in a bit of negotiation with Europe in terms of how much responsibility they should take on Ukraine. This does give China a little bit of breathing room. So China is unlikely to do much because it wants to kind of use the tools when U.S. reoriented toward China, and then China could have some tools to counter U.S. So I don't think China, as many of you may have noticed, China being generally quiet in the last couple of weeks after the private entrepreneur meeting. And the last thing that I mentioned, that the U.S. Embassy, they have this WeChat account, which is almost like a Twitter account, but it's much more controlled environment. Not everybody can comment. Your comment will only show publicly if the account owner allows it. So it's very interesting that the U.S. Embassy, the administrator there is allowing these thousands of negative comments on the U.S. and President Trump on the Chinese media space. This is, I think, a very interesting development in the sense that it could be interpreted as a U.S. politics, internal politics, bubbling up in other distant places. I think for a lot of people who know Doge, the Department of Government efficiency, it has made many of the civil servants unhappy, and since foreign embassy employees are also federal employees, so I think that might be the reason. Obviously, I have no idea internally why this is happening, but it was quite a shock for many people, I think, when suddenly this thing happens. It just shows, I think, the U.S. China relationship will still be really one of the most important relationship in the next 5 to 10 years for the U.S. I mean, obviously for China, U.S. is China's number one foreign, I would say, communication and all the topics. When it's about foreign policy, U.S. is the number one foreign policy in China. Now, obviously for U.S., China is number one, but not to a degree. But U.S. wants to reorient it toward Asia, toward China competition. I think that is why U.S. is really asking, or you can say demanding, Europe to take on the responsibility if the Ukraine war continues. Will it continue? I think it's the politics is really so above our pay grade, but from my point of view, I think ultimately U.S. still is the dominant player in terms of the Ukraine. So regardless whether the war ends so that the U.S. can reorient toward Asia, or whether the war doesn't end, that Europe is going to take on responsibility while U.S. focus on competing with China. So regardless what happens, I think the outcome is that the U.S. will focusing more on China. So hopefully, some of our content and some of our strategies could be useful to you. I personally will be at Brown University, a student-sponsored China Summit this coming Sunday, March 10th. I'll be a panelist there to talk about China's macro, its financial markets, how to build a China portfolio or China index, how we view China investment in the emerging market space. So I'll be there in person. It's been a while that I go and attend these in-person panelist discussions, so I look forward to it. And we'll bring back what I learned there. There will be many other panel discussions on China related. These are my understanding is a student sponsored, but the university is Wharton Institute funded. So there will be 2 days of discussion that's focused on China, and obviously U.S. China competition across tech, tariff, and all the areas we've been really trying to focus on it. So thank you, and look forward to talk in 2 weeks again.